Matt restored this entire area. He planted about 10,000 trees. He's personally planted all sorts of small plants and big trees, and you'll see more of that as we go along. So he's typical of a lot of the landowners insofar as they have a really personal relationship to the land. He's been working on this property for about 25 years.
Great.
So this is the chord that would begin this. Would be, if you could imagine, many voices. And so these are some of the voices of the trees. And then this is a stronger voice. This is a soloist. And Matt, you've planted a lot of these trees. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the trees? And
Yes, we've planted over 10,000 trees here at the Nature Preserve. And our idea is to make a contiguous forest that's large enough to make a real good habitat for certain neotropical songbirds. And if you don't have a contiguous forest, if it's slashed by a pipeline cut or a road even, it's just not viable. And the songbirds aren't able to utilize it. So.
And then talk a little bit about the songbirds, because you actually have relationships with the songbirds. On the way up here, you left them a little bit of brunch.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, they're different types of songbirds. We planted the forest actually for songbirds that most of which are migrants. So they've gone now, they're on their way to Central and South America. The ones I'm leaving seed for here though today are mostly the chickadees. These are winter residents, birds that will spend most of the season with us, including the colder months.
Okay, so now I think what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the first part of the measure, and what I want you to do is walk with Eddie to show him where some of the initial trees were and talk a little bit about how those trees were chosen. So I think you can go forward.
Okay. Some of them are.
So what we're doing is we're painting a measure, and each tree is a note, but we began with a chord as we entered this space, and now we have the actual melody of the measure. So I looked for the very first tree that would be the of and what I did was I looked around the forest, and I looked for trees that call out to me visually, emotionally, and this one really called out to me. So this is our first tree, and Matt, why don't you say a little bit of something about this tree?
Well, the tree is an American basswood, kind of the American version of the linden tree, which people are familiar with from Europe. This particular one is sitting at the edge of a vernal pond, which is populated by wood frogs. And we get the chorus of wood frogs sings right below this tree early every spring. It's really quite remarkable to hear them. The basswood also brings in bees. The flowers are very popular with pollinating insects, especially honeybees. And so at certain times of year you'll hear them buzzing like mad above that tree. So it's a very musical place you've chosen.
So one of the things I've said is that in order to create this design, I think very synesthetically. I think about the acoustics and the visuals simultaneously. They're really just one. It's not that it's together. It's one for me. And I think as anyone passes through the forest, you're intuitively drawn to certain spots. And so I think this tree called out to me and said, I'm the American beginning of another relationship to the forest. And it has this fabulous acoustic environment around it, which is going to be really essential to the full installation of the piece once it's entirely finished. So let's go on.
I don't think many people probably realize this, but dead trees are one of the most useful things you could have in a forest ecosystem. They become the apartment buildings for wildlife. A squirrel will nest in a natural cavity. Woodpeckers choose dead trees on purpose, not only because they harbor carpenter ants and other species of insects, but also they make the greatest nest cavities. So a woodpecker pounds out a hole. They might use it the first season. The next season, another species will use it, maybe a flying squirrel. and eventually, probably sooner than later, this tree will fall over. When it does, it will decompose and become part of the soil, enriching the soil, actually enabling other species to grow, other flowers, other trees.
Incredibly beautiful here.
Well, thank you.
And I think we outdid ourselves. I think we really knocked ourselves out to give you a beautiful measure.
Oh, well, thank you. I can read about that many notes.
Is this it? Yeah, this is all of it. Do you read music?
Duh. FACE, every good boy does fine, is about my
Pretty
limits.
good.
That's my limits.
So, did Tasha explain the idea to you at all?
Most of it, I think, but it wouldn't hurt to reiterate.
Okay. So, there's an artist in Canada, Peter von Tiesenhausen, and when the gas companies tried to come through his ranch, he said, "Excuse me, but it's copyrighted. Every last corner you can't come through." So they started to take him to court, and he fought them initially, but at some point they backed down because they were getting such bad press over it. His family was sick, he was a known artist, blah, blah, blah. So they backed out. Then these activists put out a call and said, "Hey, can some artists help us apply this to the pipeline situation here?" And I responded, and I created what's called Blue Trees. And Blue Trees is a series of 1/3 mile installations that are measures in a symphony if you could visualize the score from aerially.
Okay.
So the distribution of the trees actually creates a melody over 1/3 of a mile. And that melody is also the diagrammatic map for which trees are going to be painted. And they're painted with a sine wave. And the sine wave is made out of ultramarine blue, which is non-toxic and translucent, and buttermilk, which grows moss. And the basic melody goes like this. And forgive me, I'm a bit tired. So that's the map. But on your property, we did something very special. So we started in the deep woods. So, and then we came down here, and then we went back up, and then we went across. So this is actually the first movement of a 5-movement symphony. We've already done the overture. We did it in Peekskill. We copyrighted it, and we sent a cease and desist demand to Algonquin Pipeline and Spectra. So now we're going to do a second copyright. By now we have about 15 sites internationally where people are painting these measures, and they're chiming in with a Greek chorus where people do individual trees. So Tasha's going to paint her tree. She'll be part of the Greek chorus. So for you, we did in the deep woods. We started very high. Then we came down into the deep woods. We went and then in the deep woods we went and then we came across diagonally and made a chord. Your pear tree and a branch, and then if we had done this we would have done an octave stretch, but since we're not, it goes and then there are 2 more trees. And that's it.
How unique. I would have never guessed.